Well, hello everybody. My name is Jesse and I'm your virtual adventure guide here with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. I know we've got a lot of students joining us for the very first time today, and so if you are new to us, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. Now, last year we did over 520 programs bringing scientists and explorers around the globe into classrooms for free, and I want to say a huge thank you to all our teachers for coming back, joining us again this year. It has been so exciting in our first 2 weeks of broadcast to share all these incredible stories of adventure and discovery. Now, last week, we actually wrapped up with World Rhino Day in Kenya with the amazing team at Old Pejeta Conservancy and the last 2 northern white rhinos. So I'm excited, and it's fitting that we are diving in today with a little bit more of a Kenyan story at Amboseli National Park, one of the most beautiful and iconic places on this planet. But today's story is a little unusual. We are joined live today with a speaker who joined us last for March Mammal Madness in 2022. So for those who don't know, March Mammal Madness is one of the most iconic, incredible outreach programs in the world. I really encourage you guys to check out the LibGuide link below, whether you're live or on YouTube, and learn a little bit more about us. But Dr. Mauna Dasari joined us as part of this incredible festival in late February to get people all riled up for March Mammal Madness. And today she's joining us for her first solo program to talk to us about baboons and the microbiome. Baboons are probably all familiar with. The microbiome might be a bit of a new concept to a few of you, but we're going to learn a little bit more about what it entails and Mauna's unusual fieldwork in Kenya. So without further ado, Dr. Dasari, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the broadcast.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you all today.
Well, you've already seen we've got our 4 classes live. We've got a bunch more on YouTube. I'd love if you're willing to dive in and take us away, and we'll take all those questions at the end.
Awesome. So I'm going to do the classic. You all can see my screen now. It looks good.
We can see your screen and it looks great.
Perfect. And my cat has just jumped on the table, so you might see him as well. He knows exactly when things are also broadcasted.
Every broadcast needs a cat, actually. Even if people don't own a cat will make its way in every building. Yeah. It's quite uncanny.
Okay, so as Jesse just mentioned, I'm Mauna Dasari, and I'm really excited to talk to you all today about my career journey and some of my research. I've been really fortunate to go to a lot of amazing places over the course of my career, and I'm happy to talk about any part of it. Any part of my journey, so please ask whatever questions you can think of. There are lots of silly questions, but I love silly questions, so let's get to it. So I like to just start by talking a bit about my early background and family, since that's a really important part of many of our journeys. So going back to when I was pretty little, I always knew I really liked reading and learning, especially about the natural world and especially about wild animals. I was also asking questions and trying to work through problems on my own through experiments. So here we've got a picture of me with a sunflower. That was an experiment I ran to see if talking to my sunflowers would help them grow taller. We might have had some confounds with shade, but they did go pretty tall anyway. But despite all of my experiments and other sorts of interests, I didn't really know what it meant to be a scientist. We didn't have Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, but we did have the Kraft brothers through Zaboomafoo and stuff like that. So I thought that was what a scientist was, which they are scientists, but I didn't know what research meant or how to get into that career. And that is with the privilege of really educated parents. So my mom is a family practice doctor. She delivered babies when I was younger. And my dad is trained as a mechanical engineer, but they also immigrated here from India, where you don't really do an undergraduate degree in the same way we do here. So they went straight from high school into medical school or engineering school. So they had to know what they wanted to do right from the get-go. On top of that, their main concern for my sister and I was to make sure that we had good educations that would lead to really stable, independent careers, and we could support ourselves and our families like they were supporting us. So in India, that mostly corresponds to being a doctor, an engineer, or maybe a lawyer. So it was a slow process to realize that med school was probably not the right path for me. And that started really questioning that in high school, when I thought I was going to follow my mom's career path and become a doctor. But as I was volunteering at the local hospital and rotating through different sections, all right, Brent. Yeah, he had to be on the computer.
Yes, of course.
It seemed like most of the oh, I'm going to turn off closed captioning. That's what that was. Most of the different rotations I was going through, I wasn't really interested in. They seemed to mostly focus on different types of paperwork, and the ones where I was actually interacting with people involved a lot of blood and other things that I wasn't I was kind of squeamish, so it was kind of a lot. I was still a big reader though, and I read this book about Ebola that I was fascinated by. So this book, The Hot Zone, had research scientists that were working to understand this disease. It's a very dramatic book. A lot of it is very a Grey's Anatomy type situation. But what I found I was really focused on were the different methods. So I still remember that they used like a diamond tip scalpel to cut open cells. And I was like, okay, if I'm really focused on these different methods, that probably means that maybe microbiology is like a place that I should look into. And it also showed me that there are places like the Center for Disease Control that I'm sure a lot of us are much more aware of at this point. So maybe that's somewhere I'd like to work if I was going to do research like in this book. So once I got to college, I stayed relatively close to home because we're from the San Francisco Bay Area. So I went to UC Berkeley. And I got there based on good grades in high school, but I also kind of didn't really understand how to study just quite yet. So I had trouble in a lot of my science classes, especially the lower division ones that are kind of like 500 different people to one teacher. It's a lot. It's pretty overwhelming your first time. But at the same time, I was also taking anthropology classes as part of kind of just other classes that you could take. I didn't know what anthropology was before I was taking it, but it's the study of people, which includes our cultures, our histories, our languages, as well as our closest relatives, which are primates. So I absolutely love this new view I was getting on science. It helped me kind of realize that I wasn't bad at chemistry so much as I needed to understand chemistry in a different way. So once I once I got to biochemistry, for example, I understood chemistry perfectly. I just needed the biology with it to kind of help me along. So I think it's really important to really explore what you're good at and not think of what you're bad at so much as like what you like and how to really help yourself through other things. Like I wasn't great at math, but my entire PhD was in like machine learning, which I kind of mentioned but don't talk about. So you'll kind of get through it the way you can if you're really interested in that sort of question. So if I hadn't taken these classes I didn't know anything about, I wouldn't have realized how much I would love studying what I do. I also didn't know anything about scientific research. So I volunteered in labs while I was taking classes. In undergrad, often you can get class credit for doing work in different research labs. So it's a different kind of experience. So I got to work with mentors that were international students who immigrated for their PhDs. So it was really interesting hearing about their experiences and learning a lot more about what they did, what graduate school was, and how that compared to like my parents' experiences. So when you first start undergraduate research, you're going to be doing a lot of boring stuff like washing dishes or preparing different things. But I was counting moss as my version of this. It wasn't super exciting to me. It was cool research overall, but I didn't like the actual work of it. So I actually switched to a microbial biology lab. So we were looking at the community of bacteria within a mine site. So I got to make this beautiful picture here. I got to look at the microbes under different microscopy techniques and really the kind of colors that they are shows what type of bacteria it is. So I really loved the work I was doing in this lab and realized that I wanted to continue this later on. And then once I kind of understood that process of research a little bit more, I took some classes based around actually executing independent research projects. So those projects, I was working with graduate students on their projects, and these ones, I was actually designing the project and executing it myself. So over the summer, I got to take a primate behavior class, and I created a research project about a species of small ape called the Saimang. So that's the Saimangs here. And as a final project, we got to write up our research and share it with the zoo staff, which was a great introduction to how we write up science. And my second research class was part of a study abroad program. So I got to go to French Polynesia to look at a fungus that was in this swamp habitat. So I picked probably the least exciting or like the dirtiest part of the island to look at. But I got to go help with some of my classmates as they got to snorkel and catch fish for their behavioral projects or collect spiders and do all sorts of amazing things. So it was a great experience, both being out there and helping others conduct independent research projects and helping with that collaborative process that is science. Even after graduating and having all these experiences, I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I decided to work for a few years and get experience in a lab. I actually worked in a wine chemistry lab for a little bit, as well as a biotech startup, because again, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. You got to do these things. But I really missed talking about primates and wanted to improve my public speaking. So I actually also volunteered as a docent at the San Francisco Zoo. And while doing this, I realized I love talking about evolution and ecology, and I really missed my little microbes. I missed my primates. So I went to graduate school. I went to the University of Notre Dame to work with Dr. Beth Archie, who collaborates with the Amboseli Baboon Research Project, which I'll tell you about in a second. And I got to go out and study baboons, study their poop, understand a little bit about how the gut microbiome changes as we age. But what is the gut microbiome? The gut microbiome is a community of bacteria within our guts that we basically outsourced a number of really important functions to. So this is illustrated by this little figure here, where for every human gene in our body, there are 360 microbial genes. So they're doing a ton of different things that we can't necessarily do ourselves. So these different bacteria, collectively known as the gut microbiome, are responsible for breaking down our food, producing vitamins, training our immune system, and resisting pathogens. So even more interesting is that our guts are extremely plastic, so they change constantly. They're changing daily based on what we're eating, where, who we're living with, who we're interacting with, and a number of other different factors that are specific to each of us as individuals. And despite the importance of the gut microbiome and how we know it's doing all these really important stuff, we don't know very much about these communities. We've actually only been able to study them in the same way that I've been studying them for about 10 years now. So this is a brand new field. And we don't know a lot about how changes to these communities might impact our health and fitness just quite yet. And part of that is because most of our understanding of the gut microbiome largely comes from studies done in humans. And humans are great, like we do want to know about our own health, but humans, as we all know, we have complex lives. We live in a huge variety of environments. We interact with a ton of different species. You all saw my cat already. Sometimes we're interacting with dogs, we're interacting with bugs, all sorts of stuff. We're eating different things. We're taking different medicines, and those change our gut microbiome and also change across our own lives. So our gut is changing with us constantly. So it's going to be really hard to study the gut microbiome in humans. But if we look at wild animals, we can kind of get away. Like, I'm not giving any of these baboons any medication. They're just eating their natural diet. We're not interacting with them in any way. So they're a perfect system to kind of study a more natural microbiome in. And I collaborate with the Amboseli Baboon Research Project, as I mentioned, which has been collecting individual-based data on a wild population of baboons since 1971. So we have over 50 years of data from the Amboseli population. And we've been following these animals, the same two social groups, since 1971. So it started out with just the two, and they break up, they come together, all sorts of different sorts of behavioral things happen. And over the years, we've studied about 2,000 known individual animals. And I mostly mean we, as in our Kenyan field team, who are pictured here, because they know all these individual baboons just by the way they walk in some cases. Like, I literally asked Kinyua, how to identify a specific baboon. He's like, oh, it just walks funny. Like, I can't tell what a funny baboon walks, even now that I've seen like hundreds of them. So they're the experts on it. We defer to them, and they work with our project leaders, who are pictured just to the right of them, to come up with new types of data that we're taking, new ways to analyze the data that we do have. And thus we get all of this cool data that I can use for my project that a bunch of other graduate students have used to learn more about baboons as well as ourselves. But why should we study baboons? So if we're interested in thinking about them from a human aspect, baboons are an amazing model system. And also from like a study system aspect, like they're on the ground, which makes them a lot easier to study than running. If they were running through the trees, we don't have to catch any of the poops that they have, which a lot of the chimp researchers, they lead like little funnels to catch all sorts of things. So it's nice that they're on the ground. They're eating everything that's on the ground. They're omnivorous primates. So like us, they're eating kind of whatever they can get their hands on. They'll eat vegetation, they'll eat fruits, they eat bugs and rabbits and things if they can catch them, that sort of stuff. They also live in large multi-male, multi-female social groups. So they live in mixed sex groups. And they also evolved in the savannas of East Africa, which we also evolved in. So they're kind of like a good version to understand the gut in. These animals are also developmentally very similar to us in that they have an extended juvenile period. So they stay pretty young for a long time. Like they've got a long teenage period as well, and then a long adult period. But this is only about 10 years or so. So in that 50 years worth of data, we have a ton of different baboon life histories that way, as opposed to a human when we wouldn't even necessarily get one person in that 50 years. So it's a great system to work in. And they're also really cool. So I'm excited to show you now about like how we get to the field and how we study these animals. So to actually get to Amboseli, this is my advisor actually in the blue coat walking in to get our like permissions basically. But this is the airport that's at Amboseli National Park. We have to fly from the closest major city, which is Nairobi, on a tiny plane. I think there were like 6 seats on this plane. And this is the entire airport. So then we drive from this airport to camp, which is a little bit more like glamping than you might expect. But again, our Kenyan field team is out here all the time. So we want to make it nice for them to live in. So our tents have an actual floor. We've got nice furniture in there. This is actually while I was moving out, so that's why everything is a little bit awry. They wouldn't like put sheets on the bed or anything like that if you were going out there that were messy. And we also have batteries that like we've actually rigged up solar panels to charge car batteries. So we have power at night, and they also power the fences that keep our camp safe from our neighbors that would be nosy if we'd like. So that's these elephants over here. That's literally right outside camp. And you can hear them at night just kind of grumbling around. We go out almost every day to monitor the baboons. So here, Ben is actually trying to track down the group that we're supposed to be going to using a radio transmitter. So that's Ben here. And Kinua over here in the truck is actually writing notes for the group that we did find. So those 2 baboons that are in the front. And again, Kinua knows all these baboons just by looking at them. And then while we're out looking for our baboons, we also see a number of amazing other animals too. So we're lucky to work in an amazing place, but especially with amazing people that can keep an eye out for cool stuff like this cheetah family that I saw on my very first day out there. Ben and Roth heard on the radio that there were cheetahs out there, so we went to go see them. All of these pictures are from a car. Also, I want to emphasize that we are not getting out and interacting with any of these animals. We want to make sure that they're safe, that we're safe, and that we can keep studying these awesome animals. And the baboons obviously have to be my favorite animal out there. They're the most fun. They're silly guys. But to actually study their microbiome, this is what I'll kind of end on so we can go to our questions. But we kind of wait for them to have to go to the bathroom. And it's a little hard to see here, but below this baboon who has gone in a tree, unfortunately, it's a little bit harder to collect when they're in a tree. We'll collect their fecal sample and we'll divide it up into a few different ways because we want to study a bunch of different stuff from this fecal sample while we have it, or this poop sample. And to actually get to microbiome data, we'll extract the DNA from these fecal samples. So while I was in the field for a good amount of time, most of my PhD work involved the stuff that I'll talk about in these next 2 slides, which is bench work, actually analyzing the data that we got from these poops. And then, I did this a lot. There are a lot of samples, so we have to keep doing all this bench work. And then we actually look at the sequence data on a computer. So I had to learn a bunch of different coding languages to actually do the machine learning that I mentioned. And I'll just quickly end by saying I was lucky. So after I did my PhD, I wanted to get a job where I could work with wild animals still, or in a conservation field, but also not have to go all the way to Kenya. I do want to start a family at some point, and that it becomes a little bit hard. So I started a postdoc at the University of Pittsburgh, where I was studying frogs, and that was actually the first frog I caught. Was this female bullfrog there, and I got to work with them, trying to breed them, trying to get tadpoles. And I actually just ended this job, so I'm happy to talk about frogs. But next week, I'm starting a new job at the California Academy of Sciences, where I'll be working with science educators and scientists to fund all of their work. So I'm excited for all the questions you all have. And I will stop sharing screen now.
Very cool. Mona, thank you so much for all that. And kudos in the California Academy of Sciences gig. I will stress for our students that might not be aware of this, but there's the iconic science center in the world, basically. California really does seem to do it better than pretty much anybody. And so it's so nice. What a cool opportunity for you. And so, yes, we're going to dive in with questions. We've got our live classes, our YouTube friends. If you have questions about baboons, the microbiome, if you do want to throw in a question about frogs or Mona's current work, feel free to do that as well. But we are going to head first to Miss Ross's class joining us today in Woodstock. Come on in, guys, and take us away. Hey, everybody.
Hello.
My question is, does baboons have the same digestive system as us?
That's a really good question. So baboons have a pretty similar digestive system to us, but other primates wouldn't necessarily. So there are the leaf-eating monkeys that are in Asia have kind of a longer digestive system because they need it to change basically based on what they're eating, which is leaves. So our gut will change based on what our diet looks like. It doesn't change too much in humans. I don't believe it changes too much in baboons because we have these pretty varied diets, but it's a really good question. And there are actually people in my previous lab that are studying that in rodents.
Fantastic. Very cool. Thanks, Mona. Miss Haagen-Dazs' class, let's head to New Jersey. If you guys want to unmute your mic, come on in. So nice to have you guys back with us. Take us away.
Hi. Hi, my name is Lucy. My question is, how did you discover that the microbiome changes with the age of the baboons?
Yes. So I had to do a lot of work with, so basically when you have all of your data back, you can look at how a different microbe will change over the entire time because we have so many samples. We had samples across the animal's entire lives. So I could look at each individual bacteria to see, oh, it's like going up when this animal is an adult. This one goes down as the animal ages. So maybe it's associated with the like breast milk that it's getting or something like that. So it was a lot of individual studying like that, studying these bacteria like that. But then that's where the machine learning kind of comes in, where I can use an algorithm or like a different computer program to take all of that data on what these bacteria are individually doing as species and see what they're doing collectively across the lifespan and which are most important, which are less important, and that sort of thing.
Great question, guys. All right. Ms. Robinson joining us in Petawawa, Ontario. Come on in, guys, and take us away, grade fives. Hey.
Assembly. My question is, when is a baby baboon ready to live on their own?
Yes.
That's a really good question. So baboons they're very small and very dependent on their mom while they're still like breastfeeding essentially. And they get weaned around 1.5 years. At that point, they're still very dependent on their parent or their mom for food because she'll show them how to eat. Otherwise, they're eating a lot of dirt and like other stuff. What they eat is actually really hard to get out of the ground. I was trying to dig up a corm for a minute while I was out there with them. I got a lot of weird looks from baboons. But yeah, it's really hard to actually get that food. So they need to kind of watch mom or watch their aunts for like another 2 or 3 years. And then they reach adulthood by like 5 years of age.
Which is really, really long. It's really interesting. As people, we have the longest dependency period of, I think, any animal on the planet. And you'll notice this increasingly around species that are really intelligent. A lot of primates, elephants, whales will stick together as families for a long time. So you not only have that sort of built-in intelligence based on the size of your brain, but also from the ability to witness and see what other members of your community are doing. And so it's such a fascinating topic to see how that develops over time. And I always love questions around this. So thank you so much, Ms. Robinson's class. Miss Becker, let's head to San Diego. We might take some from YouTube if we've got any from our groups after that. And then we'll do another round with all our live classes. But come on in, Miss Becker's crew. Hi, guys.
My question is, when baboons get older, do their gut change too?
Yes. So their actual gut doesn't change so much, but the bacteria within it change. So they kind of have a lot of different types of bacteria across their life, but it starts to go down as they get older. And we think that's because they just can't eat as many different types of foods. So like they can't climb as high in the tree to get those different fruits. They can't chew up the harder foods, like your teeth kind of wear down as you get older. So all these different things are going to change what the different bacteria are in their gut because they don't need all those different types of bacteria either because they don't have as much different types of food.
Between 85 and 90, my grandmother only ate chocolate, basically. That was just it. There was nothing, you could try and go for like whole grains, but why bother when you can just have chocolate when you're 85?
Exactly.
More fun that way. Miss Roz's class, 2 students together. I'm going to head back to you guys. If you have another question for us, come on in.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Maya, and my question is, what do they eat?
Hi, my name is Landon. And is there any food that baboons cannot eat that will make them sick?
Yeah, those are both good questions. So baboons eat a lot of, I was kind of describing corms, which are like, if you pull up grass, sometimes there are like roots, but these types of grasses that they're eating have kind of almost like tiny potatoes is like the closest thing, like these little starchy things at the bottom. So they're eating that for a lot of it. They eat the grass leaves. They eat, well, they'll eat bugs. They'll eat all sorts of things that they can kind of get their hands on. So it really changes based on where they're going. And is there anything that makes them sick? I assume there's actually a lot of stuff that makes them sick. They're kind of like us, where like if you eat something bad, like you're not going to feel well, that sort of thing. So, but these guys, they're pretty resilient. Like I've seen them eat elephant poop, actually. Like they'll suck on elephant poop. So they'll do all sorts of things, and you'd be surprised what won't make them sick.
I'm really glad you mentioned the eating the poo thing, actually. This is actually a fairly common thing in the animal kingdom. We're really not used to it. We find it sort of instinctually disgusting as people, but a lot of animals will eat the poo of either their own species or that of others. In part, we think possibly to regulate bacteria inside their gut or to get certain things that they need that they just can't get in any other way. You mentioned breastfeeding a whole bunch during this program as well, and I really want to stress one of the coolest things in science that we know from people is that if you breastfeed as an infant, your microbiome in your gut is radically different than if you only drink formula. Sort of humans evolved to drink breast milk, and so that's sort of the natural way that we develop that community of microbes in our gut, and so we're starting to see very different sort of gut flora in people that grew up differently, which is fascinating. I want to stress too, I don't know, I'm sure you've read this book or at least know of it. My introduction to the microbiome was I Contain Multitudes by Ed Yong, one of the best science writers in the world, probably at the level of our grade 8 students and above today, but just a really fantastic read for teachers, for parents, anyone that might be keen to learn more about this topic. Miss Hoggenjaws, back to New Jersey. Come on in, guys, and take us away. And unmute your mic. Yes, there we go.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Izzy, and my question is, how will this research be used to help humans?
Yes.
Yes, good question. So this is really what we call foundational research. So we don't know a lot about the gut microbiome, but my research in aging will help us understand, okay, the gut does change. Maybe we should think about doing this kind of stuff in humans. Maybe we should think about like how our diets or medications will affect it, like because we know that the gut microbiome is actually changing. It's kind of that proof, that like very base level proof that we'll build upon for any human stuff. So then like medical researchers or things will move on from here.
So because we're going so fast through this Q&A, I want to harp on this question for a second because it's one we get a lot from grade 8 and above classes is like, how does this research impact us? So they've done sort of overall reviews of how science operates in the world. There's countries that really like to focus, okay, if we're going to do science, we're going to pay for it. It's going to be something that we can see a direct benefit from. And there's places that say, we're going to pursue knowledge for its own sake. And what they found is that the places that go pursue knowledge for its own sake end up with way more developments, way more technology, way more everything, because knowledge is worth it in and of itself. The best example of this I like to share with classes is CRISPR. So a lot of classes are now getting familiar with this gene editing technology, the greatest thing in biodiversity ever now. And this stemmed from an interest in bacterial immune systems, how bacteria fight off viruses, basically, which is about as niche as you can possibly get and has now led to this incredible technological development that's worth tens of billions of dollars in its very early stages and is changing the world. So I love that question. Thank you very much, Izzy. Miss Robinson's class, back to Petawawa. Come on in and take us away.
So I have two questions. Did you get sick from checking out the fungus on the fungus on the leaves?
Yeah. What's your second?
Yeah. So I'll answer that one first, or do you want to give me both questions, or are they two different topics?
They're two.
Okay, so I'll answer that question first. But I didn't get sick because these fungus, they're kind of self-contained. So there was nothing actually coming off of them. I'm also making sure I'm not eating anything out there, taking normal precautions when you're out in the field. Like you don't want to, for that very reason, like you don't want to make yourself sick. You also don't want to transfer it to different environments in case it's not a great fungus. So yeah, great question.
Yep. All right, our second one. Go for it, man.
And why are baboons your favorite animal?
Ooh, no pressure.
Yeah, so baboons actually aren't my favorite animal, but they're close. They're my favorite animal I've studied, I guess. Or no, my favorite animal is the siamangs and the gibbons because I studied them and I love them. But baboons are great because they're silly. They're like, it's like watching teenagers interact, as well. I'll say it's like that scene in Mean Girls when they're showing the cafeteria. And like there are all these different cliques and they all have different grudges, and it's so interesting to just watch them interact with one another. They're also very dramatic animals. They'll scream, they'll like do weird things, like they'll sit in weird positions and get groomed. They're very interesting. And because there's so many of them, there's always something interesting to watch going on, which is nice compared to like the siamangs, which kind of sit there and digest food mostly.
I want to stress, just for people that want to look them up, if you look up siamangs, they're just the most incredibly beautiful animals, and all gibbons have this ability to swing from a branch from about 40 feet. So it's one of the coolest things in nature. It's the closest thing to flight that anything in the primate field has ever gotten. But I'm so glad you mentioned the thing about watching them comparatively to people. So whenever we have a primatologist, they talk about this, that it's shockingly similar to watching teenagers. Is actually, you're not the first person to mention this as well. And vice versa, when you watch teenagers, do you ever go like, wow, it's just like a bunch of baboons, or what do you?
I try not to, but yeah, I'm also not often observing a lot of teenagers.
Yeah. Oh, great question, guys. Ms. Becker, back to San Diego. Come on in.
So my question was, so when you used to study the baboon poop, so like, how did you deal with the smell of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. For a lot of it, so we actually powder the poop to ship it from Kenya to the US. So that's actually like, I think that takes away a lot of the smell, the poor people in the lab in Kenya doing it. They actually freeze dry it, so I think that also helps. And then we powder it and then we send it here. But because it's a powder, when we're working with it in the US, we wear masks, just like you all are now very familiar with. So that helps a little bit. You just kind of end up with a lot of fecal powder anywhere and everywhere. But it also, like, because these animals are eating a really natural diet, it mostly smells like grass, or like if the worst smells like if you've been around cows, like the smell of manure. So it's not so bad. You just kind of get used to it, I think, is actually the answer.
Slowly but surely. Fecal powder is not a phrase we hear every day.
Exactly.
Yeah. I want to stress, though, just again, we're going so fast through these. This is fantastic. For students that are interested, one of the coolest things for me when I think about the microbiome is this new burgeoning field of fecal transplants in people. So there's been several diseases of the gut that people have had for many, many decades. And no matter how many antibacterials we threw at them, they were resistant to treatment. What we thought was, instead of trying to destroy the bad bacteria, why don't we sort of give people good bacteria? And so increasingly, you'll see this in hospitals around the globe. Fecal transplant is a way that we can do this to fight things like C. difficile and other diseases. So in terms of transporting poo in other ways. Mona, is anything happen? Are you good? Cat coming?
Yeah. There was a great book about this as well by Rob Dunn that I can't remember the title of, that talks about Crohn's disease, I think specifically, and the lengths that people were going to kind of help with that.
I'll try and find that as we do our third and final round of questions for you. Yeah. Ms. Ross's class, back to you guys first. Come on in.
Hey. How many different species of animals have you studied?
Yes. So I'll say I've attempted to study 6 different species. And I say attempted because I studied the primates easy, but the frogs those were kind of a struggle because I was trying to study tadpoles. And to study the tadpoles, I needed to collect the adult frogs and then breed them. So we weren't super successful in actually breeding the adult frogs, but I tried to study tree frogs, bullfrogs, green frogs, and leopard frogs. And I only actually managed to get tadpoles from the green frogs. So science can be always interesting. There are always little setbacks. Yeah.
It's never as straightforward as we all hope it would be when we go to the field, especially. Back to New Jersey, Ms. Hawkinjaw's class. Come on in. Hey, and unmute. There we are. Perfect.
Hi, I'm Amanda, and I want to know what was your favorite independent research topic?
Yes.
My favorite independent research project. It's probably, I mean, it's got to be the PhD work if Beth is ever watching this, my advisor. But the one that really set me off into research was the work on the gibbons at the Oakland Zoo. I loved being able to observe them and actually like be out there with them every day. The baboon stuff has been great, but again, a lot of it is in the bench, and that was entirely field-based. So that's kind of, there are always pluses and minuses to whatever research you're doing. And I love the primate work, so hopefully I'll get to go back out at some point.
Fingers crossed for you, and thank you to Amanda for giving a thumbs up at the end of your question. Makes my day. Miss Robinson's class, come on in, grade 5s, and we'll wrap up with Miss Becker in just a second. Hey, guys.
How many feces samples do you take a day?
Yeah, do we take a day? I think when we're out in the field, we do half days because the field day starts either really early or kind of late, and it's hot out in the savannah, and also the baboons need to rest too. Like they're going to take a nap for a while. It's not going to be exciting to study them then. So we start at like 5 in the morning on days where we start sampling in the morning, and we go until noon. And depending on what the baboons are doing, we get at least like 30 to 40 samples, I'd want to say. Some days we get more if like they've eaten, like if they're eating a lot more and staying in one spot. The way we actually collect them, we only collect the fecal sample if we know who gave it to us. So we want to have that individual data attached to it. So if we just kind of see a poop on the ground, but we don't know who left it, then we're not going to collect that one. So I think that is probably the limiting factor. So it's whoever is like identifying them and can actually see that this is a fecal sample we should collect.
Follow-up question on this. Okay, you've got a bunch of baboons, they're out together, and you see someone go to the washroom. Do you run into that moment and sort of scatter them away to get it, or you have to wait and you're like, okay, I know that specific one. You just got to keep your eye on a specific sample, so to speak.
Yeah. So we don't like approach the baboons. We never walk towards them. They can sometimes walk towards us. We don't look at them directly or anything like that, because in the primate world, that's kind of a dominance gesture. So we have like these popsicle sticks that we put like the labels on. So we'll label the popsicle stick and the time that sample was left. And we'll kind of keep it and kind of try and walk around the group until we can kind of get to that area. And as that animal is kind of moving away, then we'll put the popsicle stick in that fecal sample and start processing it. So if we can't make it to it, then we just have a popsicle stick that will break. But yeah.
Very, very high-tech fieldwork science. I love it.
Exactly.
Miss Becker's class, wrap us up with one final question, guys. Come on in. I love the mic, by the way.
How long do baboons live?
Baboons live, they can live a pretty long time. So we found across our population, the female baboons will live much longer lives than the male baboons. And that's partially because of their behavioral aspects. So like the males will fight each other, and that doesn't like lead to a long life. So male baboons live until about like 15 or so on average. I think 13 is like when 75% of their population is kind of gone. Whereas female baboons can live up until like 19 for that same statistic. But the longest lived animals that I've studied, I think the longest lived male was about 20 and the longest lived female was 27. So she was a little bit younger than I am.
Which, by the way, is very high for an animal that size. Like you talk about that being a long lifespan. I think people think 80, like 20, that seems so low. For something like a dog or a cat-sized animal, dog-sized animal, this is a really long lifespan. And so we see this in a lot of primates, that they tend to live longer than their counterparts and various other things. But I love that question to wrap us up. Mona, this has been such a fun opportunity. Thank you for all our students for joining us today. Is there any last message you want to share with our kids about the microbiome? Anything that they can take to go home with to learn a little bit more?
Definitely think about what you're eating. Have a diverse microbiome. Eat a lot of different foods, and that'll help feed your microbiome. So have your yogurt, but also make sure to eat your veggies and all sorts of things.
Perfect. I love when our programs can end with eat your veggies. That's a beautiful last message. If you want to learn more about Mona's work, MonaDasari.com. And if you want to check out March Mammal Madness to join us again this coming February and March, check out the LibGuide below, and I can absolutely send that to any teachers that are interested. Mona, what we do to end every broadcast, I'm going to bring in all our teacher friends to say a big thank you and farewell. So Miss Ross, Miss Haagendoss, Mr. Robinson, and Miss Becker, if you'll join me in saying thank you to Mona. Thank you so much, everybody.